Yeah, very good. We should definitely talk, especially after I have to do something, organize my thoughts for the speech. But let's talk more
Excellencies, friends, comrades, thank you for coming today. I'm going to make a short speech because the main guest is going to be a Norwegian writer, and this is just to show how solidarity, friendship, revolution, criticisms, politics, debate, it's something that matters and it's alive. It's completely alive and it's taking place, not only in Venezuela but around the world. I will just put it simple. I'm going to make only a couple of instructions, and I learned this from Danish gatherings, that please, those who want to smoke need to go outside, okay? And the other side, and by the way, we're going to do this in the really Danish way, which I mean, we are going to have dinner, and we're going to have speeches, and we're going to sing. Okay? Well, so once we fulfill all the preliminary instructions, I just want to start with the main issue of tonight. We are celebrating here one of the latest victories of Commander Chávez, electoral victory, popular victory 1 year ago, the 7th of October. Just to put it shortly, in that occasion, Chávez won against really powerful forces, even that he was almost dying. But the best thing of all is that a couple of months since then, the 14th of April, he wins again once he was dying. So that means that even that he's not physically with us, his task, his duty, his legacy is with us. So in honor to that day, I wish just to join me with Venezuelan national anthem, sing it by Commander Chávez precisely the day that he won the last elections. This is not the anthem, it's going to be the last anthem. This was celebrating the victory. The same night of the elections. I'm not going to put the whole version, it's too long. So the idea is that we are going to have speeches, short speeches. Only our main guest is allowed to have a long speech, as long as he wants. While we are having dinner, so as soon as the chef is ready, he will serve the entry, and then we will have the honor to hear from him what he's preparing for us. There are only Venezuelan typical dishes. Okay? Well, I know that today is the night that we are going to talk about Chávez's legacy. It's, by the way, it's the motto of my speech, but allow me, please, to start speaking about myself. Not myself, my experience. In 1992, Chávez led a civil and military rebellion against the system during one of the supposedly strongest democratic process in Latin America, 1992. I can introduce myself as, in that moment, as a young man from the middle class with the privilege to go to school, to university, has medical facilities, and so, believing that democracy has enough tools to defend themselves and improve any mistakes, any error, so there was no necessity for military uprisings. That was my personally perception of the situation. So when Chávez decided to run in elections in 1998, I made what was the only moment in my life that I didn't vote. I made my sympathies for the Communist Party in Venezuela, and they recommend us to vote for Chávez. But I came from a Spanish Republican family. We have suffered persecution, we have suffered the humiliation from fascism, and regarding the history of military in Latin America and the history of military in Europe, I decided not to vote. It was a challenge for me what to do. I didn't vote. But as a communist, and I'm proud to identify myself as a communist, I say we need to have an historical dimension of the situation, so I will hear the whole speech for first time in my life directly from Chávez. And was the first time I heard such a long speech, and I wasn't used in that moment to that. I get used, no? For me it was delicious to hear really, really good speech with meaningful and heart and so, but in that moment I only going to remember two things. First, when he made the military rebellion, he say, for now, por ahora. And I say, okay, maybe this is a historical person who has a dimension of his duty in the future of my country, so we need to follow it. I didn't follow in that moment, but when he win the election, he say, my only task with this victory is to give power to people. And I say, okay, one of the strangest things of military, or paradoxical things about military, when they get to power, they don't give the power to anyone. They reserve for themselves. That's the normal. In Latin America, in the Arab countries, in Europe, anywhere. So I'd say, okay, this is the first time, if he's honest, this need to be followed. That por ahora, for now, need to get more attention. Do you know what? When he finally swore as a president, he said, my only statement is going to be that I'm going to call for popular elections to make a new assembly to reform the state. So he make a promise. He make, first of all, an analysis of the historical dimension, then he make a promise, and then he fulfilled a promise. It was the first time in Venezuela that anyone that promised to do something really do it. So in that moment, I decided personally not only to hear all the speeches, but to try to join him in his task. And I did it because we established, it was the first time in Latin America, a parliament, that a president called a parliament to reform the state. And I remember those days, well, as soon as they called to election, the elections took place, the new assembly to create a constitution was established. And I remember in that moment that some of the most close advisors of Chávez, they were worried. What are you worried about? Things are going as you plan. Because in that moment, Chávez wasn't concerned about that moment, but about the next future. How can we make this beautiful idea to born in peace? I mean, there is a state, a constitution, a political system, and we want to throw away all that and create a new one with no violence, with not a single drop of blood, with not a single, no one hurt, or feel any hurt. So he was calling us, how can we contribute to this peaceful burn? I must say that I started to work in what we call the small assembly, or asambleia in Spanish. It was some kind of joke, because we only have one duty and one task. We can run for elections, we can present for any political charge, and our unique goal or task was to convince all the political forces to vote favorably. First of all, remember that people vote favorably to the new constitution, and we need to convince the whole parliament just to disassemble itself by themselves, by own initiative, and leave the way free to this new constitution. I must say that we achieved the goal with 82% in that moment of favorable votes. So the new constitution, the new political system was born in the main direction, as he said, in peace. In that moment, I get committed to working with them. So I remember the hard days of the coup d'etat, while everything was, you must try to imagine all the media with this manipulation, try to convince. That's why I invite journalists. Actually, my speech is going to be based in a journalist speech from USA, by the way. And with all the pressure of the media trying to convince that Chavez and all the system they were killing innocent people, I would say, I don't believe that. I work close to this process. What can I do? Well, I call my family and I say, I'm going to defend this, because this needs to be defended. And I remember the kindly words of my parents. Remember what the parents say, it's quite usually during the speeches, and say, what are you going to do if you don't know how to even shoot a gun? I say, yes, but I can run really fast, so I can make them waste a lot of bullets. So that was my duty, because we were committed to defend this even in peace. And remember the pictures of the people fighting against a coup d'etat with a book in the hand. The Constitution was the only weapon. It was the first time in modern history that only the state of the legal system of a new peaceful born state that was born was powerful enough to defeat a coup d'etat with all the power of media and international press. What a beautiful moment for those who will be able to be there. I was there. Okay, it wasn't necessary for me to run. So when I started, actually, as a matter of fact, when I started to run, people was in the palace already, no? But that's another lesson for revolutionary force in some bureaucratic levels, that when we start to move, the history is moving ahead of us. So two beautiful lessons learned the same day. Since then, I'm working on this project. That's why I invite you. All of you are my special guests, are friends from different sectors, the industrial sector, political sector, journalists, writer, artists, refugees, any kind of person, but really friends. Okay, so I'm not going to speak no longer, so please enjoy the meal, because it's hard this to get cold, because it's cold, but the idea is to have dinner and exchange idea and just share. I'm going to introduce you, just the last words I'm going to say. This is a special reportage from a North American journalist, and he arrived to Venezuela and he's trying to be impartial, but you will notice something really strange in this. He's an honorable man. I don't have any criticism to him, but you will see that there is a huge mistake in his point of view, even that everything he said there is favorable to what Chavez was leading in that moment. Please enjoy your dinner and enjoy the speech.
Elections are just days away in Venezuela, and presidential campaigns have come to a close as the state finalizes preparations before opening the polls on Sunday, October 7th. The country's electoral system has been the topic of great discussion, as all eyes turn to Venezuela to see whether they will re-elect Socialist President Hugo Chávez to a third term, or whether the opposition's candidate, Eirik Vold, will be able to close in on Chávez's projected double-digit lead in the polls to secure the first opposition presidential victory since Chávez was first elected 14 years ago. While most observers have praised the technological advances in the Venezuelan voting system, others have cast doubts on the electoral process. This is the headquarters of the National Electoral Commission, known by its Spanish acronym as the CNE, one of the 5 independent branches of government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Its task is to oversee and administer the electoral process in the country, and it is headed by 5 officials, including members of both the current administration as well as the political opposition. The Real News spoke with one of the 5 officials at the CNE, Tania de Amelio. She explains that Venezuela has updated its completely automated electoral system with an integrated thumbprint identification program used to activate the machines for each voter and ensure that their vote remains secret and secure. In addition to the digital touchscreen recognition, voters also receive a paper receipt, leaving both a digital and paper trail that can be easily traced and audited. D'Amelio says the real strength of the electoral system is the capacity to audit every step of the electoral process in conjunction with representatives of the opposition.
La fortaleza de nuestro proceso es el proceso de auditoría. Nosotros hacemos en el Consejo Nacional Electoral aproximadamente más de 17 auditorías, en la cual participan todas las organizaciones con fines políticos. ¿Qué significa eso? Que el Consejo Nacional Electoral no hace su proceso aislado de las organizaciones con fines políticos, no. Todas nuestras auditorías, es decir, la auditoría del registro electoral, la auditoría de las máquinas, la auditoría del redespacho, la tinta indeleble, entre otras auditorías, las organizaciones con fines políticos están presentes. Es decir, ellos validan paso a paso todo el proceso electoral.
The Carter Center, which was founded by former U.S. President Jimmy Carter in 1982, is a non-profit human rights organization with a self-described emphasis on seeking to prevent and resolve conflicts, enhance freedom and democracy, and improve health around the world. Founder and former President Jimmy Carter recently stated, as a matter of fact, of the 92 elections that we monitored, I would say the election process in Venezuela is the best in the world. Hector Banoli, director of the Carter Center in Venezuela, says that the automation of every step of the process, from pre-election voter registration to election day voting to post-ballot tallying, along with its auditability, is what sets the Venezuelan electoral system apart from other countries.
El sistema electoral venezolano es uno de los sistemas automatizados más avanzados, no solo del hemisferio, sino también del mundo. A diferencia de lo que ocurre en otros países, el sistema electoral venezolano es un sistema integralmente automatizado. Las características técnicas del sistema electoral venezolano y esta característica de auditabilidad hace extremadamente difícil la comisión de algún tipo de manipulación o fraude que no sea detectable. En todos los procesos electorales que ha observado el Centro Carter en los últimos años, en ninguno el Centro Carter ha encontrado indicio alguno de manipulación que hubiera podido alterar los resultados.
Opposition member Vicente Bello is a Democratic Unity Roundtable, or MUD, coalition representative by National Electoral Council. He says that while the voting technology is advanced and ensures transparency, that it is only one aspect of the overall electoral process, and that the CNE has turned a blind eye to other practices that are contributing to a skewed and undemocratic election process.
Nosotros decimos que el voto es seguro y cumple el proceso. Desde ese punto de vista, la plataforma electoral es satisfactoria y funciona rápidamente. El tema de la administración, lo que hace la directiva, por ejemplo, con un recurso del Estado, una propaganda oficial completamente desequilibrada, uso de recursos del Estado para la campaña electoral. Varios periódicos nacionales, todo dedicado a la campaña de propaganda. Eso va condenado. Eso es un desequilibrio que sería inaceptable en el país.
Chávez is coming back. It's privately owned. Chávez controls over 5% of total television also in the media, there are recent accusations that the opposition has been preparing a campaign to downgrade the election to prevent the loss. Like both sides of the political divide accuse the other of participating in pre-election destabilization efforts.
La oposición ha ganado. Y toda esa elección lo que se comportamos sino que nosotros no podemos mirar un resultado del día de
Well, I know that there wasn't a lot of opportunity to enjoy the video, but I will say you what's the mistake of the journalist. The journalist is, to put it shortly, just saying that why are they saying this if the electoral system is totally reliable and accurate. And if you see, he just interviewed two different kind of person, one from the opposition and one from the institutionality of the state. So what does it mean? There is no interview any single supporter of Chávez, by example. What does it mean? That the opposition is not against a political project, it's against as a whole way of understanding the state, the system. The opposition is opposition to all of this, to the state. And that's the main lesson that the journalist didn't take in consideration. He made, if you want to be impartial, really impartial, if you want to be just straight in the middle, you need to interview both actors. And of course, in the middle, you will find or not the institutionality of laws, institutions by itself, political or electoral system, you know, all the organization of the state. But the main thing is, he talked about Jimmy Carter, which is a North American, saying about that the system in Venezuela was reliable because all of this, but just the last point in my interview, and as soon as I finish, I will want to invite the chef to present and introduce the dishes that we are going to have today. But just the last point is, let's hear what Jimmy Carter say about Venezuelan electoral system. And by the way, you can say that Jimmy Carter is Chavista.
They have a very wonderful voting system where you go in and you touch the screen and vote the way you want to, and instantly that touch screen result is recorded and can be transmitted electronically into the central counting headquarters, but it also prints out a paper ballot. And when you get through voting, you can not only have voted electronically, but you look at the paper ballot and make sure that's the way that you wanted to vote. Then you put the paper ballot in a box, and you can go back and check the results later on if there's any doubt about it. As a matter of fact, of the 92 elections that we've monitored, I would say that the election process in Venezuela is the best in the world.
So, this is, I promise, my last words for tonight. Not for now, por ahora. You know, the chefs in this moment has become like artists, they are really artists. So I want to introduce only by his first name, Carlos.
Hello. Well, rather than start calling myself a cook, I think the chef word means a lot of experience and a lot of years. And basically, what we try to do is we try to take all the taste that we have been traveling around and the taste of all those mothers, because we have all those mothers around Venezuela that make wonderful food. And we try to present it a little bit modern way. Theirs is better, no doubt. You got a little cocktail to start with, guarapita. That's something we take when we're laying by the beach, you know, and drinking some passion fruit cocktails. We made it a little bit different. And then you have this peluda. Peluda, we have different names for different type of arepas. That is the national cornbread. And peluda is big hairy. It's because all this pulled meat and the cheese. So you had it like a snack. And this was a dish version of Vuelve la Vida. Rompe el colchón, there are different names of it. It's a very funny name because it's a name that evocates all the aphrodisiac power that gives all the scallops and all the shellfish, you know. But usually you buy it again when you're laying on the beach. It comes in a mayonnaise bottle and you just eat it and it tastes much better. I mean, here we made it with some scallops, codfish, shrimps, and they had some carrot, different type of carrots, and it had a dried scallop on the top, and a sauce that was pickled. Not like the rest of Latin America, we're not the big lime users. We are more vinegar users, and that makes us a little bit similar to them in a way. So it's kind of fun. We use also a little bit celery juice on there. It's coming in a couple of minutes. Main dish, asado negro. My mom's rocks the word. It's a black roast. Basically, they caramelize the beef, and then they marinate it like for 24 hours. We did it exactly the same way. We just use the neck. They use another cut of. We use the neck of the beef, and just completely traditional. It's gonna come with some black quinoa on top and some leaf, and has some manioc. Our Indians in Amazonas against the rest of Latin America. Rest of Latin America, Popol Vuh says we're made out of corn, but we have our belief in our Indians in Venezuela say we are made out of manioc. So you are getting manioc today. You are getting in puree, and you are getting also in chips. You are getting a pico de gallo, that is our salsa, and guasacaca. That is not guacamole, it's guasacaca. Why again? Doesn't have chili, doesn't have lime, has vinegar, has basil, and a little bit of coriander always. And the dessert to finish, it was the tisana. Tisana is this little glass with a lot of fruits. Juice, when it's warm, it's just wonderful. We make it today, from the juice we make a kind of jelly, some fruits that are marinated in different kind of sugar, some with some alcohol, so I have some without alcohol. And then I have in the top, it's like kind of a foam of juice we drink also to get some power after those nights with rum. That is tres en uno. Tres en uno is a juice that is made out of beetroot, carrot, and orange. It's great, it tastes wonderful, it gives you a lot of power. We made a foam out of it, so it gives a little bit of balance to the entire thing. And of course, chocolate and coffee in the end. Enjoy.
Okay, just the procedure, please. We can serve the main course to you. So as soon as the cookers are ready, please, I will invite you each table to go and serve yourself. Okay, but now enjoy the night, please.
Como dueño del mundo.
The whole speech in English and Spanish, and both. If you want it, over the table you can pick one, okay? Otherwise, I will have a lot for this weekend in my own house. But you are free to continue picking. We are not finishing, but I think this is the right moment to introduce. I'm not going to introduce him. I'm not going to talk about him. I've been talking, it's the first time I know him, I meet him, so I don't want to be the one who tell the end of the joke or the history. Okay, so here with you is the butler, directly.
Thank you. Okay, first of all, thanks a lot for the invitation, especially to the Venezuelan Embassy. Thank you for all of the guests who are coming here to listen to me, in part, I hope, not just for the food, even though the food was obviously a good reason to come. And the representatives of the different embassies and the rest of the public. Okay. I was trying to avoid that, but it's okay. I was hiding behind the books that I'm trying to sell. I want you to look at the books as well. Yeah, I'll just say 2 words about myself. My name is Eirik Vold. I'm a Norwegian journalist. This is my first book. It's a book about Hugo Chávez. I work for several different international news media, Norwegian media. I've written for, right now I work for Radio France International English service. And I've worked for Le Monde Diplomatique. I've written for them the Spanish version and several different news media. Yeah, about the book. My first trip not my first trip, when I came to Venezuela in 2007, that was the first time I came to Venezuela with the intention of writing a book about Hugo Chávez. The first time I went there was actually in 2002, but then it was first in 2007 that I decided I want to try to write a book about this man. And I found out that the first thing I wanted to do was to have an interview with the president. So I applied for an interview. I went to the government, some government agency, and said, yeah, I'm a Norwegian journalist, I want to interview Chávez. I received a very polite answer. We have received your application for an interview, and you are currently number 1000 in the queue, waiting for an interview with Chávez. So it was a very special situation. Actually, the year before, Chávez was voted the Person of the Year in the liberal American news magazine Time, which is itself completely incredible. There was a steady stream of journalists coming to Venezuela. I talked to one, he said before Chávez there was usually around 3 or 4 foreign journalists. At the most, during the Chávez government, you had 10,000 foreign journalists and electoral observers. Everyone of the journalists there to see what this... Some thought he was slightly crazy, but everyone knew that he was an important guy, and they called him Hurricane Hugo. That was the name they gave him in the American press. And I was waiting for this interview, and what I did see was that actually not a single normal journalist actually achieved an interview. And I think I'd been waiting for about half a year when I saw the first foreigner actually interacting with Chávez, and it was the Hollywood actor Sean Penn. He was driving in a Jeep together with Chávez, and it was transmitted in most international media. Then a little bit later I saw maybe the world's most famous supermodel, Naomi Campbell. She was there with Chávez, and she was actually, she wrote an article for Gentleman's Quarterly where she called Chávez a rebel angel. And when I saw them, she was outside this public building housing complex for poor people outside the Caracas center, and they were writing on the wall a big heart with an H for Hugo and the N for Naomi. And I thought, how in the world can I compete with these people? It was seemingly a completely impossible task. So how did actually Chávez become such a political rock star? That's a big question. I mean, he was loved by millions. He won more elections than any other Latin American president in a multi-party system. But as all rock stars, I define Chávez as a political rock star. He was loved by his fans, but he was also despised and feared by the establishment. And during that era, actually, the Bush government had recently put Chávez as officially put Chávez as the #1 threat to US interests in the Western Hemisphere. So it was obvious that even though he had his fans, he had also his very, very powerful enemies. Now this book that I've written has actually 2 stories. The main story is obviously how Chávez, a poor guy born on a dirt floor in the poor and forgotten Venezuelan countryside, came to be one of the biggest geopolitical challenge of the world's only superpower in the 21st century, and how he challenged these established social structures of Venezuela, of huge income disparity between rich and poor, and almost a society that seemed impossible to change. So this is the main history of the book, and of course his quest to unite Latin America, to unite the different countries of Latin America and form a single power bloc in order to be able to challenge the US dominance of the region. And let's not forget the geopolitical realities and the political realities at the time when Chávez came onto the global political scene. He won the elections in 1998. This was only less than 10 years since the Berlin Wall fell, and it was less than 10 years since the collapse of Soviet communism. Leftist socialist ideology and leftism in general was completely discredited. Most left-wing parties in Latin America were weak, especially in Venezuela. Trade unions were weak, and there really didn't seem to be any prospect for change. Even leftist parties had stopped talking about socialism. And there was a reason why the very famous US philosopher Francis Fukuyama wrote his thesis about the end of history. His thesis was that liberal democracy, representative democracy, and market liberalism, extreme market liberalism actually, was the ultimate stage of human civilization. It was impossible to go any further or to invent anything that was better than liberal market economy. So Chávez was obviously a total surprise, a huge surprise, and he provoked a lot of fear both in the economic and the political establishment of Venezuela, Latin America and the US. But he didn't actually provoke panic. And why didn't they panic? Well, I think the reason was because both the Venezuelan oligarchy and the US thought that any leader, he might be talking about change. He might call himself a revolutionary. He might wear a red beret. But once in power, he would do what most other presidents have done through 200 years of Latin American history, which is you come into power, you forget about what you promised to the poor, and out of fear from the reaction of the US and the oligarchy, you do what they tell you to do, and then you leave office after 5 years without having fulfilled any of your promise but at least you go there with a lot of economic, you leave office with a lot of economic prejudice. So what happened when Chávez was recently elected president? He was actually quite quickly invited to the US. He was invited to New York. Chávez was, as we know, a huge fan of baseball, and his dream as a boy was to play baseball, to be the pitcher of San Francisco Giants. That dream was almost fulfilled when he was invited to New York to throw the opening pitch at the New York Yankee Stadium. And not least, he was invited to open the stock market of Wall Street. So obviously they thought that Chávez could be bought, that it wasn't such a big deal, his radical rhetorics. This was but then he came back to Venezuela, and he disappointed his new American friends a lot, quite quickly. Soon afterwards, he implemented a package of economic reform that made nationalization of strategic energy sector, especially oil sector. Venezuela has, as we know, the world's biggest proven oil reserves. And soon afterwards, just like it had always happened in Latin American history, the presidential palace was surrounded by the military, by tanks, and you had officers threatening to bomb the presidential palace unless Chávez signed his resign. Chávez was about to be forced out of office. And I said there were two stories in this story. And the second story, which is about how I became interested in Venezuela, how I actually came to hear about Venezuelan politics for the first time. And that happened just in this very strategic moment when Chávez was being surrounded by the military, when the powerful economic elite of Venezuela said he had to step down. The US State Department said Chávez had to step down, and he actually was about to be taken prisoner from the presidential palace. I was at that time in Norway I was working and I was reading the newspaper. I wasn't really aware neither of Latin American politics and much less about Venezuela when I saw a big headline that was interesting. It said, "The people's protest toppled the president." And my first surprise wasn't so much about the actual subject. It was just the mere fact that Venezuela was on the front page of a Norwegian newspaper. To me, Venezuela was famous for two things. They had the most winning beauty queens in international beauty contests and the worst football team of the whole of South America. And there wasn't anything more about Venezuela actually very interesting. But then suddenly there was this front page, and I started to read about it. It said there was a populist president. He had promised to help the poor, to take from the rich, but then he had completely ruined the Venezuelan economy, and he had become a typical military dictator. So actually it was an alliance of the whole Venezuelan society that agreed that he had to be toppled. And there was this, and this was actually the most prestigious newspaper of Norway. And there were then there was a fact box, two fact boxes that were to represent the two main characters of this very dramatic event. One was obviously Hugo Chávez, who was being deposed, and the other one was a guy called Pedro Carmona, who was the head of the very powerful business organization of Venezuela, Fedecámaras, whom the military had actually decided to put in power. And what was drawing attention to me was the fact that this newspaper actually called Hugo Chávez his title in this presentation was populist coup monger, whereas the president who was imposed by the military in what seemed to be a military coup was called a diplomatic problem solver. And I thought there is something in this story that isn't actually it doesn't really fit with reality. And later on I was to learn that the diplomatic problem solving of the new President Carmona consisted in imprisoning all those who opposed the military coup. He dissolved the National Assembly. He eliminated every single democratic mechanism in the Venezuelan constitution, and he started to talk about privatizing the state oil company of Venezuela. And it didn't really seem to fit my definition of diplomatic problem solving. So in that moment, I decided to go to Venezuela, and this is how I got dragged into this huge political and geopolitical drama, and I also tell you this story in the book. Now, this drama that took place in Caracas had some very Venezuelan characteristics, but it was also a short version of what has been the history of Latin America through 200 years. Because we should ask the question, why did Latin America enter the 21st century with the highest income disparities in the world? This is quite amazing fact, given the fact that where Africa, for instance, was liberated from colonialism as late as the 60s and the 80s, so you can't really blame them for still having colonial structures in the society. Latin America was actually decolonized 200 years ago, almost 200 years ago. So why was it that those colonial social structures where a tiny, usually white elite had all the resources, whereas a huge underclass of the descendants of the Indian population and African slaves lived in a very cruel form of poverty? Why could this exist 200 years after liberation? Well, the short answer is that every single president of Latin America who has actually, be it a nationalist, be it a socialist, be it a Marxist, be it a populist, but any single president who has actually tried to make deep reforms into these very old-fashioned, archaic social structures has been toppled in military coups or civil wars or other forms of US intervention. And this is the main reason why Latin America was still the most backwards continent of the world when we entered the 21st century. Well, the fascinating part of the Venezuelan story was that this time it was to end in a very different way. For the first time in history, the coup mongers were actually defeated. Chavez came back because of a popular rebellion, and the coup mongers had to flee the presidential palace, and it was all a very embarrassing history for especially the US and the Spanish government who had been, and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, who had actually approved of and recognized the right-wing dictatorship that was very short-lived. So I'm going to try to not take too much time, but this was the beginning. This was the beginning. The defeat of this military coup was the beginning of Chávez's his offensive phase. The first 5 years of Chávez's government, it was actually only about surviving in power. And this was something that surprised me a lot, because when I came to Venezuela and started to enter into the society and do my own investigations, I would ask people, why do you still support Chávez? This is 2003. I couldn't see any social improvements, neither in the statistics nor on street level. Poverty had actually increased the first 5 years of the Chávez government. Unemployment increased, social inequality increased. Every single social indicator was going downwards. And I asked people, and they would say, well, Chávez gave us dignity. And many people would tell the story about the 90s when poor people actually had to eat dog food in order to survive. And what was one of the most interesting facts about this was that actually people told me that nobody would tell you in the slums that I ate dog food or I gave my kids dog food. But they would say, I know people who did it. Everyone in this street did it. But no one would admit having done it themselves. And they would also tell you that people who bought this dog food, they did it are always after dark. Why? Because at that time, poverty was something that people were ashamed of. There was, the neoliberalism had created a sort of intellectual and political environment in which poverty was people's own fault. So people blamed themselves and felt ashamed. And this was the reason why, still in 2003, with no actually visible improvements, people still supported Chávez, because they said he had given them dignity back, because he had a new discourse, and he said, people are poor because the oligarchs, the elite, is robbing all the resources. But this was just the beginning. After that year, and obviously one of the biggest reasons why social indicators didn't improve was the sabotage, the economic sabotage, the military coup that made any economic improvement completely impossible. But afterwards, I would see an amazing development. And this is something I describe in the book as well. Chávez's task to change Venezuelan society that had a very tough start with a military coup, an extremely dramatic event. It was as if it was taken out of a Hollywood action movie with a happy ending for the first time in history, but still he struggled to make any social change in society. But this started to improve around 2005. And I remember especially the first time that I realized that huge change is actually taking place. I went to this this shopping center. It's called El Sambil. And I'd been there, the first time I was there in 2002, I saw only white people. I was like, the average shopping mall customer looked like me, completely European, white, which in Venezuela normally, but not always, but it normally means that you have money. So people often mistook me and thought I was a rich Venezuelan. And everyone who bought there were white. The only colored people, poor people, who speak with the socialect or a dialect of poor people were the ones who were serving or cleaning the floor, cleaning the tables, serving the ice cream. And then suddenly in 2006, I hadn't been there for a couple of years, there was a huge line to buy this delicious Italian ice cream. That was the reason why I went there. And then I suddenly realized that everyone, the half, or at least half of the people in the queue, were actually dark-skinned people who spoke like this loud voices and telling the jokes that they tell in the barrio. So it was, for the first time in history, these guys were on the other side of the desk. They were not just serving, they were actually buying. And then a couple of years later, the economic statistics started to come out of the UN, the United Nations systems, and they were telling the story about how extreme poverty in Venezuela was actually reduced by 70%, a completely incredible number that nobody had imagined when Chávez entered office. Poverty was cut in half, unemployment was cut in half, illiteracy was completely eradicated, hunger was reduced to a historically low level, and income disparities also very powerfully reduced. So this was how Chávez actually won a very important victory in changing a society that had been one of the most unequal societies in the world. Actually, Venezuela in the 90s were about to reach the same level of social inequality as South Africa during the apartheid system, which was a quite incredible achievement. Now this was being reversed by Chávez's social and economic reforms. The second stage of Chávez's offensive was the international stage. It started in 2005, at least that was when it was most visible. There was a huge meeting in Argentina, in Mar del Plata, summit between all the South American presidents, all the Latin American presidents, and the US presidents. And what was at stake at this meeting was a quite huge thing. An American president said around 100 years ago that soon will be the day when the US flag will be waving from Alaska to Panama to Patagonia, which means the whole Latin American continent, because the whole continent belongs to us because of our moral superiority. These are the words of an American president. Now this never came to happen politically, but it was about to happen economically, and this was the subject of this summit in Argentina, because the US had prepared the largest free trade agreement in the history of mankind. And this free trade agreement would mean that Latin America, which is the continent in the world with the biggest amount of natural resources, would be completely disposed of any political possibilities of taking their own decisions, of governing their own natural resources. This free trade agreement would mean that any government, any Latin American government, be it democratically elected or not, if they tried to change the rules of the game in the economy, the punishment that were established in this free trade agreement would be so powerful that it would be politically impossible to do it. You would have to follow the orders. So it would mean the end of democracy for all future, actually. And this looked like the US had spent a couple of decades in preparing this huge free trade initiative. And it looked like, only a couple of years ago, this looked like a piece of cake. But when you read the major US newspapers in front of this summit, they said, well, this is a very nice free trade agreement, everyone should agree with this, but we have one big problem. And the problem was named Hugo Chávez. And we all know that this was in the era of anti-globalization protests, but in other summits you would have kids throwing stones, fighting against the police, but it would have absolutely no impact on what people would decide, what neoliberal governments and business elite would decide inside the meeting buildings. But in this case, Chávez was there, and this was the first time the world got to see this incredible mix of Chávez's personal populism, his way of seducing the masses, but also his incredible intelligence, his slyness in building alliances. Because what happened was that inside the summit, you had all the presidents who had started to agree with this, especially the Kirchner government of Argentina, the Brazilian government, who had started to be more and more skeptical towards free trade because of its disastrous economic and social results. But when the whole thing the whole free trade initiative collapsed, was when Chávez gathered about 50,000 Argentinians on a football stadium together with Diego Maradona, and he said, let's bury this free trade agreement, and that was where the free trade agreement died. It died on a football stadium in Mar del Plata in 2005, and that was the death of the biggest free trade agreement in the history of mankind. So that was... ¿Cómo no?
I think that we should pay tribute as well to President Kirchner, who had very serious talks with President Fox from Mexico. So things were not going on that way outside, and with all respect to President Chávez. But there was something going inside as well.
Exactly.
There was a very heavy dispute. I was a witness myself.
Very.
Mar del Plata, and it was the Summit of the Americas.
Exactly.
From Canada to Argentina.
Exactly. As I said, it was a combination of what happened inside and outside. And inside, the Kirchner government was absolutely decisive. And especially in the...
One thing more. We had to change 5 times the presidents of the presidents to avoid more problems.
Exactly.
So many things were going inside to it.
Many things.
Not only outside in that football match.
It was both. It was both. Outside and on the inside. And as I said, that was the... Exactly. That was what was so amazing with that event, because it was the combination of what happened outside and what happened inside. The sly diplomacy where Latin American presidents, especially the Kirchner government, also the Brazilian government and the Chávez government, were outplaying the Americans and Fox, as you said, the Mexican representative, and also the gathering of the masses outside, that created an amount of pressure that was impossible to ignore. And so Argentina has the honor of being the place where this free trade agreement died. And that was very, very important. That was a turning point for history, and it was the first big defeat of neoliberalism. Well, we could say that this was the end of the defensive phase, because until then it was all about stopping this neoliberal initiative. But from 2005 and onwards, we had the start of the offensive. Chávez created the alliance of the Bolivarian Alliance together with other socialist governments, and he, together with other South American presidents, started the job that ended up with creating UNASUR together with the Brazilian government, the Argentinian government. That was a special axis. You had a radical axis with Venezuela and especially Cuba, who also played a decisive role. And you had a centrist alliance, the axis Caracas, Brasilia, Buenos Aires, which was absolutely decisive on the South American continent. And what you see was how Chávez actually completely changed the geopolitical reality of the whole of Latin America. He didn't do it alone, obviously, but he was the first one who started when it all seemed as an impossible task. And I will try to end now, but I think one of the best proofs that we're not just talking about It's not because I'm a Chávez enthusiast and this is the Venezuelan embassy. I think the best and most interesting source to tell us how significant Chávez actually was in the in the whole Western Hemisphere is what the American diplomats, the US diplomats and agents wrote home from the South American continent, which has been revealed by WikiLeaks. Because whereas the US government to the outside world tried to paint Chávez as some sort of a clown, as some sort of a funny figure, but who was completely clumsy. And this was also what the media swallowed all around the world. But when you see the document they wrote home, one of the words they actually used was how Chávez outsmarted the US and completely outplayed them in a lot of circumstances. So this is why I actually draw the conclusion that this huge geopolitical change that took place in Latin America, where the US has seen its influence reduced to a lower level than ever in history, is the greatest political shift since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Because we're talking about the continent with the highest amount of natural resources in the world. We're talking about a continent that was completely dominated by the US for decades and almost a century. And it is very evident from these documents to see that this movement that Chávez started out and his alliances with other South American and Latin American governments has reduced their influence and dominance to a level that has never been seen. So thank you a lot. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I hope some of you will read the book. It's written in Norwegian, but it's quite. It's written in a quite easily understandable language, and yeah. But I'm also talking about the style. It's not an academic book. This is to be. You will pardon my enormous lack of modesty, but I've received some quite good literary criticisms in the Norwegian newspapers, and that's most of all because it's written not as some kind of academic or very thing that is hard to read. It's written like a story. It's nothing fiction to it, but it's written as a story. The story of Chávez, the guy who came from a poor neighborhood in a poor village in the countryside, in a completely dominated country, and how he became one of the world's most important leaders. Actually, the second president only beaten by Obama in terms of Twitter followers, which is also an interesting fact about how Chávez's revolution provided technological tools to the poor majorities. So it's a story, and it's a quite easy read, and what people tell me is that they start to read it and then they read it in 3 days because it's difficult to put it away. Okay, thanks a lot.
In a couple of minutes we will serve dessert, okay? And then I will give the floor to Jørgen, okay? Please introduce yourself.
My name is Jørgen Petersen. I'm the chairman of the Danish Communist Party. I would like to thank very much for the invitation to say a few words here tonight. And I think it's a very beautiful thought behind our gathering here today. And for this I would like to thank the Venezuelan ambassador Corbacho for the invitation, creating the option for me, together with all of you, to celebrate and commemorate this great last victory of Commandant Hugo Chávez won before his too early death. Hugo Chávez has written his own place in history with innumerable merits. As one of the greatest legends in Latin America, with determination and strength of will, he uplifted the Bolivarian movement and led it towards new victories and also new perspectives. The greatest result Hugo Chávez created was in Venezuela. He led a movement that eradicated illiteracy and made higher education a possibility for the youth of the workers and the poor. The huge oil wealth of Venezuela was, for the first time in history, used to crush poverty and give common people employment, education, and affordable housing. The oil was used to start up a pension system for all, for free education and large expansion of the health service. It was used to raise the minimum wage to $700, the highest in Latin America. There was no other country on that continent who has experienced such a rapid development. As a central and unifying vision, Chávez gave back the people of Venezuela a sense of national pride, unity and perspective. Hugo Chávez, he led a showdown with big business and imperialism, who for generations have plundered the people of Latin America and the great natural resources of the continent. With a number of the leaders of the region, Chávez created the ALBA Corporation. It's a living and concrete example that the oppressed peoples and nations can liberate themselves from the strangulation of imperialism. ALBA is created on a foundation of solidarity for mutual benefit, where Chávez excelled with his foresight, determination and generosity. All of these things has made him beloved of the peoples and feared by imperialism and international capital. In the wake of capitalism international crisis, Chávez helped to restore the discussion of socialism as a necessity, as a democratic and sustainable alternative to crisis-torn capitalism. Under President Chávez, the example of Venezuela was a vision that spread all over the world. Everybody who has seen Chávez speak, as he for instance did in Copenhagen at the last mass meeting during the climate summit, felt his great charisma and ability to engage and convince. Today imperialism and reaction wish to wrest back all the positions of power and wealth they lost during his struggle and life. Today the struggle continues under new condition. US and its allies in Venezuela and abroad does not shy from any means. 40 years ago, they crossed Allende's democratic revolution with one of the most bloody military dictatorship of that continent. Forces like that already attempted to go down the same road in Venezuela when Chávez was still alive. Chávez said, "Like Allende, we are Democrats, but unlike Allende, we are armed." Now reaction again rears its ugly head. In 1,001 ways, they try to create unrest and discontent through lies, betrayal, and downright sabotage of production and supplies of commodities. They want to tire the people and create the picture that there will be no calm in the country before the revolution was crushed and its gains rolled back. But the Chile of Pinochet and the endless list of US-supported dictatorship in Latin America, in Europe, Asia and Africa shows us what sort of democracy US and its lackey really wants. US on a countless pretext destabilized one government after the other in Latin America. It has secured a number of military bases for themselves, also in Venezuela's neighboring countries. Trade unionists, student leaders, spokespersons for the landless peasants in these countries, and many Democrats and others have been slaughtered by the thousands and tens of thousands, not the least in Colombia. This is merely the tip of the iceberg, which generally only reaches Danish media in short notices. Today, President Nicolás Maduro leads the people of Venezuela. As Chávez, he also has the support of the Communist Party of Venezuela. And allow me to be frank, it will be hard times to come. The struggle will require a mobilization of all the supporters, friends and reserves of the Bolivarian movement at home and abroad. It is a challenge for us as friends of the Bolivarian movement in Venezuela to reconfirm our solidarity and emphasize that international solidarity is not empty words, but commits us to take action. My call to you tonight is therefore to use our gathering to confirm our support for President Nicolás Maduro and the proud Bolivarian movement in all of Latin America. Thank you.
Sven.
Well, I've had the opportunity also to say a few words. My name is Sven-Erik Simonsen. I'm a journalist at Dagbladet Arbejderen. And, well, thank you, Corbacho, for inviting to this evening. I think it's very inspiring and it's very opportune, a very good initiative. I feel like very inspired. I very much love to discuss things. Eirik Vold's speech was very inspiring, and I just want to say one thing related to that, which is how important it was that Chávez stayed alive in 2002. I've read the book that where Fidel he tells his life story to the French Spanish I forgot his name, Ramonet. Yes, in that book there is a chapter where there is a reference to the communication between Chávez's daughter and Fidel in Havana, and all these very dramatic informations there explains how the message from Fidel was to Chávez: stay alive, don't sacrifice yourself, which I think was a very precise and very important, because Chávez was, I'm sure, dedicated to sacrificing himself for his principles, but he, with the communication and the debate with Fidel, he was able both to serve his people and stay alive, which was wonderful. Anyway, what I'm going to talk about just shortly is what could be called democratic power play in Venezuela. I think that it is worth remembering that in Venezuela they have a democracy that is very valid, although the Danish media, they prefer to give it the finger, so to say, the thumbs down about that. I was in Venezuela last year in October during the elections, and seeing the first pictures we had up there tonight in front of Miraflores Palace in the evening was very moving. I was there and I was shouting. I don't think you heard me because there was another million. It was wonderful. The day before the election, I went to a press conference in Miraflores, and at the press conference, the first person to speak was Carlos Alvarez, who was an Argentinian academic. He was there leading a group of electoral observers from UNASUR. They were there not to monitor the elections, because the elections are all right there, but to gain experience and to have meetings. And he was very optimistic about the electoral process that he was witnessing, Carlos Alvarez. And he said that Latin America had a lot to learn from the electoral processes in Venezuela. As we saw also on the screen earlier, it's not only left-wingers or academics from Latin America that praises the electoral system in Venezuela. It is also a former US president, such as Jimmy Carter. And you could not suspect him of being a Bolivarian revolutionary, so to say. But anyway, he respects and values the qualities of the electoral system in Venezuela. And this election system that I experienced there, it is very well tuned. It has been used over and over again. There has been 16 or 17 elections in the 14 years when we had President Hugo Chávez in power or in office in Caracas. And sorry for losing the red thread, but it's coming. This electoral system, well tuned as it is and well used, is different, or is giving another opportunity for people. If we look at elections in Western Europe and in the United States, people are somewhat tired of elections, because in the United States it does not matter whether you elect a Democratic president or a Republican president. You'll have the same policy. In Europe, whether you elect a social democratic government or you elect a liberal government, you'll more or less have the same policy. In Venezuela, you have a different policy if you elect a Bolivarian leader or if you elect a leader from the opposition. So there, the people, they really have a choice, and they use this choice. We see that over and over again. They re-elected Hugo Chávez, and after him, they elected the new leader of the Bolivarian revolution there. In our media, a lot of times they would point at Hugo Chávez and say, well, you're a populist, which is meant to be something bad. We should disgust him for being a populist. I love him for being a populist, or I loved him, because he was struggling. He was putting his life at risk for leading the popular struggle for a better life in Venezuela. And it did not matter for the people there in Venezuela whether our bourgeois media, they would call him a populist and say he was no good. They elected him, they knew what he stood for, and they continued doing that. During the difficult goodbye period to Chávez when he died, a new consciousness developed in Venezuela. They somehow took a new step in the democratic process. From only having representative democracy for many years, they now took a step into what you could call participatory democracy to a greater extent. I think that is the meaning, the key meaning, when people in millions in Venezuela say, I am Chávez. That means they are not going to be governed primarily. They are going to govern themselves. And finally, as Jørgen said, I think we are standing, or the Venezuelan people are standing in front of a very difficult and challenging period. You can win elections, and no doubt that the people in Venezuela are in power, are in political power. But with this unique democratic system, they run the risk of losing the political power, because if they should continue developing democracy and continue staying in power, they also need to take the step to take economic power to a large extent. This is, in my opinion, the challenge. This is what we should, how we should understand Venezuela, and that is what we should express our solidarity with this new struggle, this ongoing struggle in Venezuela. So, yes, solidarity with Venezuela, that is the message from this night. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
God aften. Nu har jeg ikke retorikkens egenskab på min side, så jeg vil prøve at formulere mig så godt som muligt. For det første, desværre, jeg vil ikke tale på engelsk. Mit accent er horribel, så jeg kan heller ikke det på spansk. Så jeg foretrækker det på dansk, hvis det er i orden med jer. Jeg skal præsentere mig selv forresten. Jeg hedder Marcelo. Jeg er medlem af Socialistisk Folkeparti. Men faktisk vil jeg hellere præsentere mig som latinamerikaner, fordi det er det, jeg føler mig som mest af. Og på jeg starte. Det var Simón Bolívar, som med sit visionære tankegang havde formuleret, at kun gennem et solid forening af nationer, at Latinamerika ville blive reelt fri. De største libertadores som Francisco de Miranda, Morelos, José Martí, San Martín, Antonio José de Sucre, Artigas, Toussaint Louverture og så mange andre delte og kæmpe for dette vision. Bolívars vision gik også ud på at skabe lykke til folket, ved at afskaffe de modsætninger, som adskiller borgerne, ved at indføre lighed og frihed støttet gennem folkelig suverænitet. For retfærdighed er nøglen til social velfærd, for uden retfærdighed kan vi ikke bygge et nyt samfund. Den vision er i fuld udvikling og udfoldelse i nutiden, og et helt nyt Latinamerika, hvor suverænitet, demokrati og politiske, ideologiske og kulturel uafhængighed er det primære retningslinje. Men vejen hertil har været lang og fuld af retfærdigheder, lidelser og tilbagegang. De fleste libertadores skæbne blev faktisk eksil, fattigdom, døden og glemsel. Det blev faktisk forrådt af en elite af criollos, som ønskede ikke at miste deres rigdom og magt. Derfor ulighed og elendighed var det skæbne, som de fleste latinoamerikanere havde som dagligdag i begyndelsen af 1900. Umenneskelige forhold i sukkerrørsplantager, hvor arbejderne arbejdede i næsten lige så hårde vilkår som sine forældre, da de var slaver. I de enorme kakao- og kaffeplantager, hvor arbejderne var næsten slaver af godsejerne, hvor man arbejdede over 12 timer om dagen, hvor man fik ikke løn, men de forhandlede fichers. Et slags penge eller en slags poletter, hvor kun kunne bruges på godsejernes butikker, hvor priserne var højere end andre steder. Derfor stiftede arbejderne gæld for at kunne spise, og derfor måtte deres børn også arbejde i 12 timer for at betale den der gæld. Eller i kulminerne, hvor indianske familier arbejdede indtil lungerne ikke kunne drikke vejr mere, fordi de var perforeret af kulkrystaller, og hvor i gennemsnit folk blev kun 30 år. Uretfærdighed skaber opstand og kamp. Derfor begyndte arbejderne at organisere sig for at opnå rettigheder og bedre vilkår for sine familier og et håb om et bedre fremtid. Men den håb blev undertrykt brutalt. I 1928, massakren i Magdalena i Colombia, altså i de der bananplantager, som var ejet af United Fruit Company. 3.000 mennesker blev myrdet. I 1920 i Patagonien i Argentina, 1.500 mennesker blev slået ihjel. I 1922 i Guayaquil, Ecuador, over 100 jernbanearbejdere blev myrdet. I 1907 i Santa Maria de Iquique i Chile, 400 salpeterminearbejdere blev slået ihjel. Alle for at forlange bedre arbejdsvilkår. Pablo Neruda skrev om Chiles salpeterminer og deres kamp. Foren din stemme med din anden stemme. Foren dit hånd med din anden hånd. Lad jeres stemme give genlyd i ørken. Lad os være forenet. Det bliver vores daggry. Sammensætning af alle de fornævnte historiske hændelser i Latinamerika blev denne spire, som voksede op, et generations hjerte og samvittighed. Den generation, som kom til at spille en nøglerolle i det moderne latinamerikanske historie. Da Jacobo Arbenz i Guatemala i 1954 blev væltet af CIA, var det fordi han ville lave et jordreform og en nationalisering, som satte et stopper for, at en lille gruppe på 2,2% ejede 70% af jorden. Og af de 70% af jorden, United Fruit Company ejede 50%. At de udenlandske virksomheder, som handlede med bananer, havde mere magt og bestemte mere end selve landets egne befolkning. Det skabte en lidt opmærksomhed hos nogle unge latinoamerikanere. Nogle af dem var Salvador Allende og Fidel Castro. Den kubanske revolution i 1959 skabte et helt nyt anskuelse af, hvordan man forandrer et samfund. Og Los Barbudos med Fidel Castro i spidsen blev målt på stor international beundring for deres revolutionære proces, hvor social retfærdighed, suverænitet og internationalisme var et prioritering og princip. Midt i turbulent Latinamerika, hvor vejen til at forandre samfund så udelukkende ud at være gennem et bevæbnet revolution, så skete i et fjernt land noget usædvanligt og uberegneligt. Et socialist, et marxist og en revolutionær vandt præsidentvalget i Chile den 4. september 1970, og på den måde blev den største demokratiske og folkevalgte socialistiske præsident i verden. Han var Salvador Allende. Selvom CIA var verdens største supermagt, sammen med Chiles oligarkiet og de højreorienterede medier, bekæmpede og modarbejdede ham og processen, så lykkedes det Chiles progressive kræfter gennem social mobilisering og politiske beslutninger at skabe gratis uddannelse og ret til uddannelse uanset social herkomst, gratis medicin og medicinske pleje, bedre vilkår for arbejdere, flere rettigheder for kvinder, nationalisering af landets naturressourcer, lavere pensionalder og retten til pension til alle, også hjemmegående husmødre. En enorm stimulering og udvikling af kulturen, gratis bøger, gratis skolemad til børn osv. osv. Tænk, at man blev væltet på grund af at ønske et mindre olie land. Chile og Allende viste til hele Latinamerika, at et nyt samfund var muligt. At gennem social mobilisering og participativ demokrati og i forening med alle aktører i samfundet, så kunne man indføre forandringer i de lovgivende institutioner og ændre den magtbalance, så ressourcerne blev delt mere lige, og alle samfundsborgere deltog i samfundsforandringer. Den smukke håb og den chilenske vej til socialisme, og samt en hel generation af kamp for et mere retfærdigt samfund i Latinamerika blev stoppet den 11. september 1973. I måske en af de mørkeste perioder i Latinamerikas historie, for så kom fascisme, diktaturernes tid. Brasilien, Nicaragua, Argentina, Uruguay, Bolivia, Haiti, Guatemala, bare for at nævne nogle af diktaturerne. Terror og umenneskelighed, koncentrationslejre som nationale stadium i Chile, torturcenter i Argentina, som i Esma, altså flodens skole, hvor tusindvis af mennesker døde under tortur. I Argentina, hvor over 500 børn blev stjålet fra deres forældre, efter hvad de blev henrettet. Los desaparecidos, hvilket modbydelig betegnelse. Alene i Argentina, i meget konservative tal, er det over 30.000 offer. I Chile 3.000, i Colombia over 200.000 forsvundet, i Guatemala 45.000 verificeret forsvundet, og det mangler stadigvæk 200.000 at finde. Det er meget vigtigt, at vi ikke glemmer, at alle de her uhyrligheder og forbrydelser bliver begået direkte eller indirekte, helt bevidst af vores nationale oligarkier, og med USA's politiske og økonomiske støtte gennem CIA. Mens fascisme i Latinamerika rasede, så blev Latinamerika ramt af en lige så destruktiv hændelse, neoliberalisme. IMF, Verdensbanken, ALCA, Washington Consensus, Ulandsgælden, USA, Ronald Reagan, Bush, Mr. Donkey og adskillige andre vestlige økonomiske og politiske institutioner forblev og forbliver i de fleste latinamerikaners hukommelse som et synonym for elendighed, arbejdsløshed, undertrykkelse og fattigdom. Chile blev det land i verden, hvor først neoliberalisme blev indført, og Venezuela blev det land, hvor den første oprør imod den skete. Det var El Caracazo. Det var bristepunktet for Venezuela. Kan man blive inspireret af elendighed? Nej, men det kan få os til at tænke, til at gøre noget. Ali Primera, den kendte venezuelanske musiker, skrev den tanke, væggenes tekst til den sang, som hedder Las Casas de Cartón. Hvor langt forbi fra husene med paptag går jo håbet forbi. Alle de førnævnte historiske aspekter har haft en indirekte og direkte indflydelse i den venezuelanske politiske proces. Commandant Hugo Chávez kom frem i den venezuelanske historie i februar 1992 med sin parole og blev valgt som præsident i 1998. Frem til sin død i 2013 formåede ham at forandre ikke kun Venezuela, men også Latinamerika, og hans vision, tankegang og måde på at anskue politik vil præge Latinamerika i mange år. Det var Luis Ignacio Lula da Silvas ord, en af de store figurer i latinamerikansk politik. Venezuela politiske, revolutionære og progressive proces har formået at skabe et nyt samfund, hvor et spæd velfærdsmodel prøves at indføres, hvor naturressourcerne bruges til at skabe velstand for de fleste, hvor et grundlovsgivende forsamling resulterede i et nyt forfatning, hvor flere rettigheder blev givet til befolkningen, og hvor et participativt demokrati er meget mere inkluderende for dem, som før intet stemme havde. Et vision, som er blevet inspiration for de fleste latinamerikanske lande. Den proces har ikke været uden fejl og mangler, men som Evo Morales har udtrykt, selvfølgelig tager vi fejl, og selvfølgelig tager vi forkerte beslutninger, men vi tager ikke helt forkert af vejen med vores principper. Venezuela, som har modstået adskillige politiske konspirationer, som årlige strejker, energisabotage, økonomisk sabotage, politiske sabotage, mediekup og militærkup, har brugt som eneste modtræk den folkelige mobilisering. I april 2013, da præsident Nicolás Maduro vandt præsidentvalget, og da opposition i et velplanlagt plan opfordrede til vold, formåede Venezuela at vise sit civil modenhed, sit politiske måde og bevare stabiliteten i landet, takket være de stærke og velfungerende institutioner. I det proces, i løbet af de sidste 14 år, har det været over 14 valg og eller folkeafstemninger. Alle har været mere eller mindre overvåget af internationale valginstanser, og alle har konkluderet om den gennemsigtighed og legitimitet. Venezuela er et eksempel på demokrati og participativ demokrati. Det bekræftes af de mere end 30.000 kommunale råd, som udøver politik på kommunalt plan. Venezuela har fået et bred anerkendelse af FN, UNDP, for sit enorme indsats imod fattigdom og ulighed. Ifølge ILO, den internationale arbejdsorganisation, så er Venezuela og Uruguay de lande, som gør mest imod ulighed i Latinamerika. Venezuelas progressive og demokratiske proces har formået at give Venezuela befolkning sit værdighed tilbage. I 1982, da Gabriel García Márquez modtog Nobelpris for litteratur for blandt andet sit værk 100 års ensomhed. Og i et brud på al etiketten var påklædt sit Guayabera, som var et klart rebelsk udtryk for kulturel latinamerikansk suverænitet, udtryk ham. Latinamerikas ensomhed, elendighed, fattigdom, ulighed har varet for længe. Lad os skabe et utopi, livets utopi, og lad os gøre den til virkeligheden, hvor lykken kan være en reel mulighed, hvor den, som blev dømt til 100 års ensomhed, får et nyt og for altid en mulighed her på jorden. Den mulighed er blevet virkelig nu i Venezuela. Mange tak.
The last speaker is going to be Niklas for Hands of Venezuela.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you to the embassy for this celebration and for inviting us to speak, and of course to the cooks for this delicious meal. But I think one thing that is necessary to explain at first is why does something that's happening in Venezuela, a country so far away, under radical different conditions, inspire so much enthusiasm and interest all over the world? I think it's very easy to explain this. It is because Venezuela represents an alternative to how things are normally done for the last several decades, especially for the youth. For example, myself, I first learned about what was going on in Venezuela in 2003, at the same times that we could watch in the media the bombing of Baghdad and the destruction of Iraq. And for me, this has always represented the alternatives in the world. On the one side, we have been accustomed to a society with war, racism, terror, where reforms always only mean one thing, and that is an attack on our living standard and our democratic rights. As an alternative, we have Venezuela. It was the first country in recent time who chose to go a different way, where reforms actually meant to improve the living standard of people, improvements that from a Western perspective might even seem a miracle, where democracy is not just something where you can vote for someone who then may or may not represent your opinions, but it's actually something you take part in, and where problems are solved for the benefit of the people and not a small, rich elite. And this is something, as some of you may know, our Hands of Venezuela campaign is an international campaign which exists in many parts of the world, and everywhere we meet this incredible enthusiasm from the youth of the Western metropolis to poor peasants in Indonesia, and especially in the Middle East, where we have seen that, for example, Israelis and Palestinians have united in supporting the Venezuelan revolution, and is taking a deep inspiration from these events all over the world. We see this response from from thousands of people. And I think that is, well, a good reason for it, because what is happening in Venezuela is not just important there. It's a, as I said, it's an alternative that shows us that not only is another world necessary, but it's actually possible. And as Comrade Chávez often said, what makes it possible is that Venezuela have broken with the normal way to do things and have begun a transition from capitalism to socialism. And this is what is really the fundament of these changes. And I also think that we must take on a great responsibilities in this event and take on a serious and open attitude to study what is and debate what is going on in Venezuela, in order to learn from both the good things and the mistakes, in order to we can reproduce these events in all over the world, because this is not only relevant for third world countries, it's always also very relevant for us in the West, where we see that our societies are in a decline, our living standards are falling, our democracies, our democratic rights are decreasing, and all these kinds of aspects. This is just as relevant for us. But I also think we should acknowledge that Venezuela is not through this transition. Capitalism still exists in Venezuela. It's very real, even though there have been made many progress. It's very real, and we can see it every day, especially in the war that the opposition, the right wing and the bourgeoisie wage on the Venezuelan people and the revolution, supported by right wings all over the world. This is a war we not only see in coup attempts like in 2002, in the many hundreds assassinations attempts, and many hundred assassinations of activists especially in the farmers movement, labor movement, government representatives and all these kinds. But it's also a very daily thing with it's possibly the most important thing, with an attack on the stability of the economy, which we see in that the capitalist sector, which still is the majority of the economy, undermines the economy. They create inflation, they fund the black market, they fund gang wars, deliver weapons, and especially they withhold production from the ordinary people. That is, they create artificial lack of ordinary necessities, food, healthcare necessities, and all these kinds of things, which does not exist for any normally reasonable explanation, like the actual lack of the ability to produce it, but as a strategy in order to undermine the process and create an environment where they can take another grip for power. And I think we must accept that the only way we can, in the end, win this war is by furthering the revolution and furthering the process, as we have often seen that the Venezuelan people have made great advancements in, that Chávez often spoke of, and that many others, high-ranking members of the Socialist Party and the government had often spoke of. And I think in the end, the only way we can win this war and create a better future, not only for Venezuela, but from the entire continent and in the end the entire world, is to secure the active participation in the running of society by the Venezuelan majority, especially the working class and the poor. And this also means, especially in the active participation in the running of the economy through a democratically planned economy, which can only be made possible if the Venezuelan government and people take away the economic power of the right wing, take away the factories that sabotage the economy, the big landowners and all these kind of things, and put it under the people's own control in order to further the interests of the whole Venezuelan people. And I think this is essentially where the struggle is moving already, and where we, both from Hands of Venezuela and from all around the solidarity environment and the left-wing and labor's movement, pledge of full support and our hopes for this example to grow and to spread around the rest of the world. Thank you.
Well, we are about to finish, and I want to invite my heartly friend, Mr. Abid Ali Abid, to come to join me, because we are going to make plenty of sense the part that at last but not least. He represents one of the friendly organizations here in Denmark. It's the Organization for World Peace, and he is committed to promote debates and forum and alternative to discuss about peace. We share one main value, principle,
yes,
that peace is not a goal itself, it's the way that we must follow on. So he asked me regarding this event that his organization want to acknowledge at least those who collaborate directly and indirectly through solidarity, through friendship, to make peace a real possibility in the world. I want to invite Niklas from Hands of Venezuela, and I want to invite Marcelo, please, to join me here 1 minute, in the name of International Forum and by itself, and in the name of Hands of Venezuela, to give this small award and recognition. This is in regards to the organization. And last, I'm not going to call this, he's going to make a bit, who's going to call.
The author of the book from Norway, and this player.
Eirik. This is for
so
you.
Eirik.
Okay, thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And from now we are going to have some greetings, but I want Mr. Abib to address some special words. Thank you for all you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's an honor for me to fortunately close the meeting, and maybe my friend will say in the end few words. It's a really recognition of the words we have, and my friend has said before. It is the recognition of the values which have been developed in the period of the Chavez. Today is not the celebration of the 1 year or the last victory of the electoral system or the last victory of the Chavez. It is the day of the promise to continue that struggle. It is the day we had to admit the change which came in Venezuela through the struggle of Chavez. It is the ideology which will constantly make its place. It is a thinking which will constantly remind the people of the Latin America and the rest of the world that there was a great leader with a great philosophy who was the pioneer in his country to continue the thinking of the people and the democratic system. It might be in months or a year, it was the last victory, but think he created a dynamic system. He made the change in the mind of the people that you have to live with your own thinking, which is the way to the democracy. He gave a thinking and a vision that we are the real democratic people and we know how to achieve our goals, how to bring the poverty into prosperity, how to create and for the constant struggle for the prosperity of the people honors. He introduced the honor of the people. He introduced the value of the honor of the human being who was working in the fields and as a laborer and a hard worker. So in my thinking, in my view, today is not the only day of the celebration. It's the day of the promise that it is a constant and dynamic process which the people of the Venezuela will enjoy years to be had, centuries to be had, and many centuries to be had. Remember, Roger, this is a plant which will grow every day. This is a plant which is growing in the heart and the mind of the people, not only in the mind and the heart of the people of the Venezuela, in the rest of the all democratic lovers. Remember, even though there are enemies of the democratic and the thinking of the people, like big superpowers, but he gave a great value to the people and his people of his country, that we believe friends, not our masters. He was the good friend of everywhere. He got the friend throughout the world, and it was the real victory. This is the victory with the people of the Venezuela, Argentine. This is the victory that the Socialist Party and the Communist Party of Denmark is celebrating with you. This is the victory that the Organization for World Peace is enjoying with you. And this is the victory that the all laborers, all hard workers, all students, all mothers, all brothers and sisters and the children are enjoying this great thinking. May God bless all of you. May God bless the thinking of the Chávez and the victory, and not his last victory, the first victory, and the thousands of victories are coming for his vision, for his light, for his lamp, where we can enjoy and play our rights, our freedom, thousands of years together. God bless all of you.
We are about to finish, but you are invited to, as the other thing I learned from Danish is there are always coffee available. So you will have some coffee and some rum, Venezuelan rum, to celebrate, and it dies. So we need to, we have another one. We have an alternative. And just two things. If anyone wants to take the floor and say some words, you can say, but while you are taking coffee, it will be a great idea to buy the book, otherwise he won't come again, okay?
There were many fine names mentioned from the Latin America, but there was one name that I really missed, and that is a Guatemalan author who doesn't live anymore. He was born in 1899. His name is Miguel Ángel Asturias, and he wrote a book called The President, and it's about a president who presents himself a very democratic and so forth. He wrote it in the 1930s, in fact, and he undresses him in the book and shows a real monstrous dictator. That's all. Thank you.
I want to give you a present. I want to give you a present. You will sign it for you. But this is a present from the embassy.
Just a short message. Can you hear me? Okay. About the book. If some of you in these days, not everyone carries a lot of cash, but this book can also be bought. You just have to sign your email, and then the editorial will send you the bill in an email. So if you want to pay that way, that's the most practical for me as well. So thank you. For det er faktisk helt umulig å ha ikke med meg. Ja, gjerne det. Uformelt, men med litt ro ved siden av.
Til at forstå
Den er vel anmeldt av internasjonalt. Så jeg vet at mange danser har lest allerede. Jeg vet ikke. Det er som hvis du bare trenger det viktige der, så er det ikke bare navn og så det er tydelig, ja, amerikaner og det er ja. Etterpå så må jeg da gi 78% til forlaget, putte litt prosent så blir det meget godt. Det er enklere hvis det er
Ja, det er faktisk ikke meget. Jeg elsker meget med det.
All your health. All your health.
Hola. I was very proud, you know. I was proud, otherwise I'm very
Lo voy a comprar a través de ustedes. Una manera de ayudar.
Poco, pero como los libros son de Noruega, es más fácil. Nosotros no ganamos una
y yo no estoy suscrito a las relaciones de otro día, porque se puede dar un artículo y otra cosa que se
sí, más el
te digo,
se ha vendido los italianos, después sí, se ha perdido
intenté hacer a lo que ella sentido bonito de comer, charlar, tú sabes.
Hola, encantada. Felicidades por el
Yo no lo leí. No quiero leerlo.
No habrá que traducirlo porque vale la pena. Yo no lo sé.
I can do more. Do you know anyone? Yes, I would Thank you. I want to close here, okay, with your recognition of your work.
What is the vision?
I want my friends. I want this. Creo que he perdido la cuenta, pero tú lo llevas y tú me dices.
Creo que sí.
No importa. Eso no es más. No, dejará como 5 o 6. Thank you for coming. Did you enjoy the dinner?
Spanish food. Yeah.
Communist Party of the Spanish people. I formed one of the with a red hair in Spain. The Communist Party it's called Communist Party of Spanish people.
Very nice book. When this beautiful woman in here always
Yeah, it's a kind of yes, it's nice.
The young women, when I was so young, I was beautiful. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.